right, everyone. Thanks again for coming to PyCon 2024. Our next speaker is Sau Yee. Two roads diverge, the gap between web development and data science in Python. If everyone can please give a warm round of applause for our next speaker. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me well. So hi, I'm Sau Yee, and before I talk, I want to know more about you. So let me ask you some questions. For how many of you is it your first time in PyCon Hong Kong? You should raise your hand. Oh, okay, wow, that's pretty cool. Okay. It's my first time here too, so very excited to be here. And since this talk is about web development versus data science, so how many of you would identify, if you have to pick one side, would you identify with data science? Oh, okay, or software, web development, software. Okay, like 50-50, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so I hope it'll be interesting for both of you, both types of audience. So I'll start. The title of my talk was actually inspired by this poem. You may not have read it, but you probably have heard of the phrase, "the path less traveled by." So ultimately, this poem was about making choices in life, just like today you chose to come to PyCon, you chose to come to my talk, which is obviously the right choice. And obviously there are also bigger life choices, right? Like maybe you're a student now and you have to pick whether you want to do more data science or you want to do more software engineering. And in my case, I actually started doing data science. And then I switched to web development 2 years ago. And I haven't really met people who have done the kind of similar kind of career switch, so I just wanted to share my experience today and hope that would be useful to some of you, or interesting, at least interesting to some of you. Yep, and a bit about me, I'm based in Japan, Tokyo. I work for a Japanese company called HK. I'm wearing a HK shirt now. I started my career in front end, and I did some big data stuff, and then I switched to web dev 2 years ago, as I mentioned. And I also enjoy hiking, so that's me in Yarigatake in Japan. So if you have other recommendations for hiking spots in Hong Kong, please let me know. So yeah, I want to talk about terminology first. So first, people say, I think there's a big myth that software engineers are engineers. If you think about it, there's civil engineering, chemical engineering, electrical engineering. But software engineering is nothing like that, right? If you think about people like them who actually code and have built billion-dollar, trillion-dollar companies, they don't have a degree in coding. They actually drop out of college. They don't have a license or any kind of professional certification, and they still code. And in fact, for Facebook, very famously, they have this slogan on the walls: "Move fast and break things." And I actually come from a civil engineering background. As a civil engineer, it's very hard for me to imagine doing this in civil engineering. So just remember, personally I prefer to call software developers instead of software engineers because it's a very different type of engineering. Another myth, as people often say this, I have said this myself, you have probably heard of it, data scientist is the sexiest job of the 21st century. But if you're a data person, you immediately start thinking, what's the data source of this? Did they give you questionnaires like, oh, what is a sexiest job? How do you define that, sexy? What are the benchmarks and how do you claim that something is the sexiest job of the century when we're still in the middle of the century, right? So I looked up some facts. It was actually a statement made back in 2012. It was an article published in Harvard Business Review with the title that data scientist is the sexiest job of the 21st century. And ultimately, it was just an article written by two people. Someone is a professor of analytics, who obviously has a lot of motivation to promote the profession. And Mr. Patel was actually the person who invented the term because the profession was so new at that point in 2012. Right. And actually, in 2022, they published another article just asking themselves, oh, is data scientists still the sexiest job of the century, given that it has changed so much in the space of 10 years. Right. So yeah, going back to kind of comparing life as a data scientist versus software developer. So when I was a data scientist a few years back, I had a lot of meetings, kind of explaining what I was doing to different people. I work in a team, right? And I would code in between those meetings. I'll try out new ideas. I'll Google, Stack Overflow, whatever you do these days, and then fail, and then keep failing, and then keep trying. it's more or less the same as a web developer. I still have meetings, actually less meetings these days, but I still work in a team. I still have to communicate my ideas. I still have to kind of explain my design, etc. And I'm still trying new designs, failing, Googling, and failing. And there's actually one more thing in common between these two, and that's Python, because you can do both in Python, right? I did data science in Python. I'm doing web development in Python. So Python is really great in the sense it's a tool that allows you to do multiple things. So from this part on, I'm going to talk about things that I found transferable, or skills that I easily picked up as I made the transition. So first thing, for example, on the left, you see kind of a simple code snippet that is classic data science, right? Like you import the pandas module, you read some kind of CSV, you process the data, and then you kind of look at the data frame to see how it looks like, and if it conforms to what you expect. And people often complain that data scientists don't write tests or don't test. I think that's not true. To me, this is a form of testing. You're testing with your eyeballs, you're testing with your intuition, you're testing implicitly that the data frame conforms to what you think it should look like. Right. And as a web developer, I simply change this into a different, like, be more explicit in my assumptions, right? I write unit tests, I use PyTest, I write, hey, test load dataset, and then check that the data type of the column ID is indeed an integer. I also write another test to check that if I have a string female, it is transformed to number 0, so which is what I expect. But to me, more or less, it's the same mindset that you're going with. And then another one, we had a talk from AWS earlier. So one thing I found about data science is inherently very cloud native. Mostly you have data in Amazon cloud service or some other cloud platform. Maybe you have an S3, maybe you use SageMaker, right? So you use the library Boto3. Similarly, you use pandas, you kind of get the object from your bucket, you read the CSV, and then try to do your magic with it. And as a web dev, it's same thing, right? Instead of using Boto3, I use something called AIO Boto3, which stands for Asynchronous I/O Boto3, and the code is actually more or less the same. And if you're thinking, oh, what is AIO? I'm not sure what it is. I don't have time today, but you can look up talks that my colleague Jonas, also from HK, has done in previous PyCons. And if I'm not wrong, there's also a lightning talk this evening about async, so you can find out more about it. Basically, it's a way to make web Python more efficient. Yeah. Okay, and now on to things that I wish I had known before I started my role in HK. So okay, this is the same code. Either reading a file, loading it into pandas, whatever. But then, okay, it looks very natural to me, but then from a web dev point of view, it could be, imagine, okay, I think because data science, you mostly operate in a closed system. You can trust your inputs, you mostly operate with like kind of more or less internal data, I think in some cases. You can obviously trust the key passed to the read file function. Whereas as a web developer, I don't know what my user is going to give me. It could be like some unknown string, or it could be like an SQL injection trying to drop my tables. So I have to be very careful. I have to handle exceptions like, oh, maybe the bucket doesn't exist, the file doesn't exist, things like that. So I found that I have to kind of whack my brain to imagine the bad things that could happen to me or my app or my company or the website. So that's one thing new to me. And another thing, type hints. This is a random piece of code I picked from the internet, from GitHub, some kind of notebook. And I think this is like classic code in data science. You have like, okay, this short snippet, but you see, okay, semantic search, and then there's a query, and then there's an embedding model, and then there's K. And then be like, oh, what is K, right? If you are handed this piece of code and you have to work with it. And then if you scan through on the 5th line, maybe you see K again. And then the K is plugged into this SQL statement in the limit part of it. So we're like, okay, K is the limit that controls the SQL statement. So it should be an integer here. So only after like scanning through the code for like 30 seconds or 20 seconds, as we did just now, then you know, hey, query is a string, K is an integer. But whereas if we had type hints in the first place, you have known that immediately. you know that even embedding model is expected to be an embeddings object from the LangChain core embeddings, and that it returns a list of dictionaries. And actually, the LangChain library on GitHub has really good type hinting. So yeah, I'll really recommend this as a practice because it's a lot easier for other people to understand your code, which is, I think, what I do a lot in web development. And one more thing you can do to make it even better is you can use type dict, typing out the dictionary. So you expect that the dictionary to have keys like ID, text, source, right? Or even you can use Pydantic, which is an excellent package for data validation. So you can import the Pydantic base model, put it there, and then with more or less the same code, your code will now fail loudly, and you'll be more aware of any potential bugs. If, say, ID is not a string but an integer, if your text is, I don't know, something else, like say you get binary or something. So it's a lot easier to catch bugs early on in your development cycle. And last thing, I think ultimately one good way, I think the best way to learn would be to actually build your own app in Python. Right, there are a lot of frameworks out there written in Python. For example, there's Fast API, there's Django, there's also Tornado, which you use at HK. And for Fast API, is really popular. You can start it out with just like 10 lines, very straightforward. It also works well with Pydantic, which I mentioned earlier, so it does type checking for you, it does type conversion to you. And the tutorials are really great. You can just follow along and immediately start spinning up your own web app in Python. And now if you're feeling like, oh, this is kind of overwhelming, even though you're interested in software development, you're not sure you can get there by yourself, you can apply to our internship program in Tokyo as an on-site program for 4 to 6 weeks. In Tokyo, in Shibuya, we have full-time employees mentoring you along the way. We actually have some ex-interns attending PyCon with us today. Yeah, so it's a pretty cool internship program if you're interested. So yeah, recap, we talked about some myths and about how software engineers are not really engineers, they're more developers from my point of view, and how data science was maybe the sexiest job, but I'm not sure how it is now, given all the recent changes and how tech is evolving so fast, right? And then we talk about some kind of transferable skills, like testing or using public cloud, and some recommendations from me, like type hinting, handling errors, and trying to build an app by yourself. So yeah, I hope you found this interesting, and thank you for your attention. Yeah, sure.